Hello. Today here, this is Kidodi podcast live from Bellevue, Washington State. And today we are having a special guest who is jointly with me in Mexico, the city of Mexico. Madame Lou Rachelle brings Attics. That's correct, Madame? Atkins, yes. It's sorry
That's close. Brim-Atkins.
to pronounce your name not correctly
That's
the
all
way I
right.
expected. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Kidodi Podcast here today. And then it is also
Thank you.
profound happy to join and accept my invitation to be here. Welcome, Madam Lou. And
Thank you.
today we are going to
Thank
discuss
you.
many issues related to your life background, your activities, and many other things that you have been done for quite some times. First and foremost, my audience, myself and my audience will love to know if you allowed me, I can be able to introduce to you. If you don't mind, you can be able to introduce yourself, who you are, your life background, where you born in United States, and currently what are you doing during your lifetime. So please welcome Madame Lou.
Well, let's see. I'll start with my name, Lou Rochelle Brim-Atkins. I'm named for my two grandmothers, Lucinda and Rachel. So my mother created the name Lou Rochelle from Lucinda and Rachel. And I was born in Texarkana, Arkansas. My parents were living in Louisiana at the time, and I had a brother who was born 18 months before I was born. And he was born shortly after World War II, and my mother's doctor was a German American doctor, and he deliberately dropped my brother at birth and caused brain damage. And my mother found out later from some of the Black people in the town, they said that she was lucky that he lived because this doctor generally killed the Black boy babies. So rather than having me be born in that same little town in Louisiana, my father took her back to Naples, Texas, where my grandparents lived. And the hospital there did not accept African American patients. So when my mother went into labor, they took her to Texarkana, which is 47 miles away, in a sleet storm, ice and sleet storm, to a Black hospital where our cousin was one of the doctors. So she knew that I would not be harmed by this doctor. And so that's how I got to be born in Arkansas rather than Texas or Louisiana. So I grew up in Naples, Texas. I graduated from an all Black high school that my grandfather and grandmother had founded. When they went to Naples, there was no high school for African Americans, and they founded this school. And I graduated from Carver High School and then graduated from University of Texas at Austin. And I then went to graduate school at State University of New York at Brockport and got a master's in urban education. I taught school there for 4 years, and then, part of that I taught in middle school as well, or what we call junior high school in Rochester. And then I went to Seattle, Washington, where I live now, and then went back to school and got a master's in spiritual psychology. So that's sort of my growing up. And I've been in Seattle. I worked in the sickle cell program for a year before I became director of training and development at the University of Washington. And my job there was to design training programs and consultations for the 10,000 University of Washington employees. I stayed there for 15 years as Director of Training and Development, and then left and
It's
started my own consulting
very
practice.
amazing
So that's a little bit
story and
about me.
background of you being born in Arkansas, Texas, and Arkansas, yes.
Arkansas, and raised in Texas. And I should say that I
Mhm.
have been married and I have two adult children and I have three grandchildren. So I
Well,
can't
it
leave
is
that out.
also
That's
a
important.
long story for you during, I believe you born during the time of Jim Crow. Is that right? Yeah, the time that America has experienced long way of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
racial discrimination in this country, which is definitely devastated so many people,
Discrimination. Yes.
including people like you. Well,
Absolutely.
your journey started in that particular state, end up in
Right.
Austin, Texas, where you graduated. If I believe you graduated 1972, correct? 69, 68. You graduated in English program, in
1968.
GA in English program, and you starting teaching at
That's right.
in K-12. I believe you
Yes.
in Rochester, New York. Can you tell me,
In,
beginning of our
in
discussion, I'd
Rochester, New
love to
York.
hear from you how you feel about
Yes.
your journey for education, first of all. Beginning in Rochester, after you graduated, you went there, you teaching. How long you
Well,
teaching at the K-12 before you moving out from New York to Seattle?
Well, I was in graduate school in a program where they recruited African Americans to come to Rochester to go to graduate school so that we could teach in the inner city programs, inner city schools. So because the African Americans and primarily Puerto Rican kids did not see very many role models of African Americans in education. So the program that recruited us wanted them to know that African Americans were teachers too. And it's interesting because I grew up in the South where all of my teachers were African American until I went to college. But these kids rarely saw an African American teacher. So our program changed that. And after graduate school, I stayed in Rochester 3 more years. But I left because it was cold in Rochester, snow and ice for months on end. And I loved teaching. In fact, I'm still in touch with some of my kids that I taught in junior high school 50 years ago. They're no longer
Absolutely. There's no,
kids.
they are not
They have their own
anymore.
kids now. But, right. But they come to see me. They fly to Seattle to see me. So, and they're
Yes.
in touch with me on Facebook and email and phone calls. So they tell me I made a difference in their
Yeah.
lives and I'm going to take them at their word. I hope I was able to do that. They said, and I think this is true, they said that I believed in them when no other teachers did. They were Black kids. I kept telling them, yes, you can do this and you can excel. Um, and they
Okay,
believed me.
if I
So
don't mind,
I'm
if I
pretty proud
ask
of
you,
that.
as I believe that you graduated in English studies in first degree in Austin, Texas, and also you went to do other masters and other masters.
That's
Could you
correct.
tell me a little bit about what kind of subject you teach in the beginning while in Rochester, New York, before moving to Seattle, where you joined with the
Okay.
University of Washington and
Right.
finally open your own consulting company. Tell me what kind of subject, and primarily you teaching Black Americans or vast of different ethnic background here in U.S.
Okay. So one of the things that stood out for me is the fact that many of the white teachers did not have the belief that these kids of color, Black and Puerto Rican kids, could learn. I had a colleague when I was teaching first grade, in fact, who said in a staff meeting, I've worked at this school for 30 years. I've taught first grade for 30 years, and I've never taught math because they're not ready for math. And I was incensed because I had been black and in the first grade, and I was taught math. So I knew that black kids could learn math. But this woman had, for 30 years, had crippled children because she thought that, and I said to her, that's your job to teach them math. They don't have to come here knowing math. Your job is to teach them. She got a little miffed with me, but I didn't care because I was young and said what I wanted to say and what I needed to say.
Mhm.
And I just couldn't believe the principal sat there and let her say that. So that's one thing I learned. And what I wanted my kids to know that they could learn and that it was our job as teachers to teach them. And so that's what I did. My kids next door to this woman, next door to her classroom, my kids were learning math. They were learning reading. They were learning, I mean, all the kinds of things that you're supposed to be learning. So why was it that my kids could learn and her kids couldn't? It wasn't the kids, it was this woman. So that's one thing I learned. When I went to the junior high school, again, I faced a situation where many of them had never had a black teacher. And so they sort of glommed onto me, and I glommed onto them, and we had a great time. I taught in a way that had been modeled by my grandparents, particularly my grandmother, who would go to visit her students. We'd get in the car and she'd drive around and visit them and talk to them about their projects. She was a home economics teacher. And I saw how she cared about her students, and I thought that was the way you're supposed to do it. So the kids that I taught in junior high school, I would invite them to my house, the boys and the girls. We would cook big pots of chili and sit around and eat and laugh and talk. And then the boys would go home and the girls would spend the night. And then they would sit and laugh and talk with me half the night. And that's how I got close to them. An interesting story is one of my boy
Mhm.
students on a Saturday came by my house, and and he had a friend of his from a different school, and I was washing my hair. So we just sat down and I washed my hair, and they were laughing and talking. And this other kid from the other school looked, he had this strange look on his face. And my student said to him, well, what's the matter, man? And he said, I can't believe I'm sitting in a teacher's house on a Saturday afternoon. And my
Okay.
student said, oh, it's okay, man. She's different. And for me, I was glad I was different because I knew that some of them had never been to a teacher's house. And I didn't want them to think that teachers are sort of distant and um, off limits to them. I wanted them to know that teachers were approachable or could be if they chose to be, that they had their best interests at heart. I had a group of students who I taught. I was also doing some teaching at University of Rochester at the same time in sickle cell programs, and lead poisoning was a big deal in the inner city. So I did dramatic presentations with these students, and we went around and did education sessions at different schools and with doctors because the doctors didn't know that much about sickle cell. Um, and so they just became my kids, you know. They were I gave them African names and they gave me African names. And I say African because we didn't know which countries they were from. We just got a book and found names, and I named them. And they said, well, we have to name you. And I was like, okay, what's my name? And they called me Muka Nzinga, which means beautiful mother of all. It means beautiful mother of all. I think Nzinga is from Nigeria. I'm not sure what Muga is from. But these they still call me Muga. When they call
How
me,
proud do you feel
they still
being
say,
giving
"Hi,
that particular
Muga."
name? We love it. Okay, madam. Let me move
I
on
love it. I
to
absolutely love it.
moving
I
out of
absolutely.
Rochester, New York to Seattle. That particular portion, mostly you teaching student and from uh, K-12. Did you teach at university as well, as you said? In Okay,
I taught at the University of Rochester. There was a program to invite Black kids
okay,
to
okay,
become interested in science careers. So I taught there as well, and that included trying to get people interested in
hmm
medicine or any of the medicine related fields. So that's how. And I had a mentor there who was an amazing woman, Naomi Chamberlain, and she taught me. She
yes.
combined the sciences with drama.
Okay,
Can you
so let
believe?
me move on to your life here in Seattle. I believe when you arrive in Seattle, you join with the University of Washington, correct, madam? And then what is your role was
That's
to
correct.
what role you participated upon your arrival here in
Well,
Washington
my
State at
my first
University of Washington State?
my my first job was I was a
Okay,
genetic counselor. The title was longer than the salary. The title was genetic educator, consultant, trainer. So I did work on genetics, which was on sickle cell, and I did
okay,
counseling of people who had sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease. And I did educational programs, including at the University of Rochester Medical School, and in community kinds of events. So that was my first job. And I did that for a year. And then I applied for the job as Director of Staff Training and Development.
15 years. Um,
And I
yeah,
did
let me
that for
come up with
15
a very
years.
additional question in terms of
15 years.
being a teacher in Rochester, New York, where primarily teaching people of color. What you experience here in Washington State, which is diversity is completely different at the level where you hold as a training director and also teaching some other sickle cells. How do you compare in between two sector of position while you are in New York and Washington State?
Yes. So I was my first graduate degree was in urban education, and so
Oh, teaching
the
people how
program
to
was
teach.
teaching people how to teach.
Okay,
And that's the urban education. So when I got the job as staff training and development, I wanted to teach adults. And so that was how I got connected with the University of Washington Staff Training Development. And I built that program. When I went, there were 4 courses. And when I left, there were probably 20, 25 courses for staff. And consultations with departments. So if departments needed some organization development, some management skills, some
yeah.
coaching, some
What kind of
team
a student
building, then they
mostly
would
is
call me
black,
and I would
white,
provide that as well.
Asians, all kinds. And so,
All kinds, all kinds. Anyone who worked at the University of Washington would take classes from us. And I wasn't the only one
okay,
teaching.
let
I would
me
hire
move
people
on
to
to
do
you've
training
been
as
working
well.
there for
Uh-huh.
15 years, and then you decided to move out and open your own. Did you
Yes.
retire that, or you just decided to move on and open your own new chapter in your life?
Well, I was too young to retire, so and I had children, so their tuitions had to be paid. So I did not retire. I
Is
did
any
resign
motivation
and start
leading
my own
you to
consulting
decide
practice.
to
So that's
open
how
your
that.
own consulting company? And what kind of consulting company that moved you?
Yeah, that's a great question. There were several things that encouraged me to do that. One was whenever the state of Washington had budget cuts, they would look to what they call soft programs to cut the budget. So training for employees is often considered soft. Physics and math and that kind of thing, that's considered hard. And I say it wasn't soft, it was tough because you're trying to change people's behaviors as they are working together. So that was my job, or I should say our job. Um, so
It's
that was
mostly
one
budget
reason.
cut,
I got
but
tired of
also
budget cuts.
that's one.
That was one. That was one. One. But another was that I had had a great boss who was very supportive of me and everything that I did. I wrote the policies for release time for employees to go to classes. I hired people to teach classes. I did the consulting in departments, and my boss was just very supportive of that. And
Okay.
then he was going to retire. And I was going to be reporting to a person who did not believe that training should exist for University of Washington employees. He was the personnel director, and it's hard to believe he didn't believe in training, but he didn't. And I was going to be reporting to him. And he and I had not had a very pleasant relationship because he didn't believe in what I was doing. He'd send me these nasty little notes,
Yeah.
and then I'd have to send him a little nasty note back. And, it was just, and I thought, this is the handwriting on the wall. I need to leave. So the combination of all of that, and I had wanted to open my own consulting practice for years, but had been afraid. I had children, and it's like, well, it's one thing if I'm starving, but it's another to starve them. But I finally got up the courage to do it when my boss said he was leaving, and I thought, okay, now's the time. And I did it and never looked back. Never looked back.
Okay. Let me yeah. Well enough, madam, for that particular decision that you made out of University of Washington and open your own. Can you tell me a little bit about what are you doing in your consulting company
Well, I'm
right
trying to
now?
retire right now, but when I was doing my consulting practice, and I started it in full time in 1988, so I was at it for a while. But most of my work was consulting with departments, nonprofits, for profits, corporations. I had clients like Microsoft and the Boeing Company, and I had clients like City of Seattle and King County and Simpson Timber Company, and so all kinds of organizations where I would provide training and consultations and coaching for managers so that their teams worked more
Man,
effectively together. So that's pretty much.
how many yeah, how many people you have so far in your
So
company
my
as a
brother
consulting
came
company?
and started working with me full time. And then I had a virtual team of 12 other people. So I would bring people in to do projects as they came up. For example, the Boeing Company, we trained 18,000 employees, managers, supervisors, executives. And for that one, we had the full complement of 12 who helped us train 18,000
12. Yeah.
people. Um, City of Seattle, there may be two of us. I had a contract with what was then Washington Mutual Bank, and there were two of us on that. So it just depended on the size of the contract.
How proud are you feel being working as a consulting company? How proud you feel prior to the education sector that you have done for University of Washington, and before that in
You,
Rochester, New
you
York.
know, I
How
I
proud are you?
I'd like to think that we made a difference in people's lives. I have lots of testimonials where people wrote me after the work and said what kinds of changes they made in their behaviors at work. So that makes me feel really good about it, about the work. And I think, as with any job, you can look back at it and say, well, I wish I had made this difference and I wish I had made that difference. But I've also learned that you can leave something for someone else to do, that you don't have to do it all. So I feel really good about the accomplishments that we did make. And one of the things I learned is that I may not be everybody's teacher, that there may be someone coming after me who can reach someone. And I'll give you an example of that. I had a woman 5 years. Oh, I did a lot of what people call diversity, equity, and inclusion, or anti-racism work, and that would make a lot of people upset, right? They didn't want to think that they had ever been racist or discriminatory. They're good people. Well, you can be a good person and be racist. Being racist is just
Absolutely,
one part of who
absolutely,
you are. You can have a loving relationship with your family, with your friends. You can be just great, and you can still be racist. So pointing that out to people was
absolutely.
not pleasant, and I tried to present it in a way that they could hear me. Uh, but I remember one woman said, I was in a class that you taught 5 years ago, and I was so angry with you. I was just furious. She said, but 5 years later, the light bulb came on, and I thought about you because I understood what you were trying to say to us. So, as I said, I may not be everybody's teacher, or it may take a while for the message to come across. My job is to present it. My job is to help you unfold the knowledge, help you get in touch with what the possibilities are. But my job is not to force feed you, because that may come later, and I'm okay with that.
Okay, madam. Let me move on to one of the area here. I can read your background. Basically, you foster cultural community interaction with the
Yes.
racial communities. You look, America is a diversity and vast of people
Yes.
from different backgrounds, and you've been advocate also in that particular area. If I go back here, I look upon your history, your background, and what you have done. Tell me a little bit about racial interaction and cultural activity here in US. Being a teacher yourself, and you've been doing that
I
kind of
have.
stuff, don't you?
Um,
Just give me a little bit. My audience
Well,
wants to
I
learn
think
from you.
part of what I have done in my work has been to provide possibilities for people to see the world and their place in it differently than they may have been raised to see it. I was raised in segregation. I until I went away to college, I didn't know any nice white people.
I'm sorry for
Well,
that.
it is what it is. And I don't know that it was a bad thing, because I grew up around some amazing black people who had my back at all times, who looked after the black kids in the community. I knew that I had a whole community of people who loved me. People use that expression, it takes a village to raise a child, because that's what they have been told. But I lived that experience. So I don't regret that part of it. Segregation, on the other hand, was a challenge, uh, nasty and unfair and unkind and all of that. But one of the things, when I went to University of Texas, there were more white people than I'd ever seen in one place at one time. I mean, they were everywhere. And I'm like, well, what do I do with all these white people who in the past have not been very kind to me? And then I discovered that there are actually some nice white people. And for some people that
Really?
sounds It's like, well, of course well, maybe of course if you've grown up around some nice white people, but if you haven't, you have some impressions. And I had to deal with that. There's a thing called cognitive dissonance, which means you cannot hold two opposing ideas at the same time. You can't
with other people
you can't
because of
go
different
right
color,
and
correct?
left at the same time. So you've got to figure out how to reconcile those two opposing ideas. And so I had to come to terms with the fact that yes, there's some nasty white people and there's some kind white people, but that was a process. And because I had to go through that process, I believe it was easier for me to help other people go through that process so that they could see
Okay.
my experiences are this, but there's a whole world of experiences out there that are different than mine. If I just stay open long enough to let myself experience that. So that's kind of the approach that I used in my racial equity work and my diversity work. Um, People would make these stereotypes, and I would have to say, do you know all the people in that cat? They'd say something like, well, black people do this, or Africans do this, or Mexicans do this. And I'm saying, you know all the Mexicans? Have you met every one of them so that you can say that with certainty? And then, well, I don't know
Hmm.
all of them, but the ones I know. And how many do you know? Well, I worked with a guy. Saying, you worked with one man and you now have information about the whole group. So, it's almost like talking people out of their experiences and talking them into wanting to have a broader experience. So I've spent my working adult life providing those kinds of opportunities.
Okay, madam. I definitely understood you exactly where you came from, and then the way of your life, and particularly not your way of your life here in America, but also in generally, America came long way into that particular ratio integration and ratio
Though
profiling and other
we
aspects.
still have a ways
But
to go. Yes.
yes,
Yes.
it is a long way to go, but seems to be things has changed a little bit so far. Compare between 1960s, 1960s, all the way up to now. Things has changed so far, and you've been mostly advocate in that particular area. We call it equity and inclusion is very important to everyone, regardless of the color of background, ethnic background, and so on. Let me see here other aspect of our discussion today. You've been collected an African leadership story based on your background. Tell me about African leadership story you have. My audience wants to learn a little bit because you are president of the sister city of Seattle, Limbe, in Cameroon. We go there also to discuss about it. Just brief me a little bit about the story of African leadership story collected. You've been awarded in this. You won Griffin Jackson Award. I believe so. That's the
Well,
one you
I've
received.
received some awards, but that's not why I do the work. I mean, awards are nice, but so I'll just tell you why I'm involved in work in Africa and why I lead some of the work.
Yes,
So I am co-president of the Seattle Limbe Cameroon Sister City
Limbe,
Association, which is where you
Cameroon.
and I met through
Yeah,
that work.
yeah. We met through Bawa Initiative
That's
Health Project
that's
Foundation
right. That's
in
right.
Cameroon. I didn't know that you were president of Limbe sister city. Limbe is one of the
That's
sister
correct.
city
That's
in
correct.
Cameroon, and Bawa was different project that you
That's
attending
right.
that
So
time when we
Bawa
met.
is a
That correct?
village in Cameroon where one of the professors at a university in Washington State grew up in Bawa, so he's from Cameroon, and he heard about our work with Lembe um, through a person who was once our board member, and she's Cameroonian as well. And he asked if we could support Bawa clinic that he had built. And so we pay the salaries for two nurses at the Bawa Clinic. But let me back up just a little bit. You were asking, why I do this work in Africa. And Kwame Nkrumah, who was the president of Ghana, said, "We are African, not because we were born in Africa, but because Africa was born in us." And I really believe that Africa was born in me. Now, and I don't know how I got that, because I have people who I know who are African Americans who say, "I don't want to go to Africa. I haven't lost anything in Africa." And I say, "You have. You just don't know you have." Because Western society tries to get us to believe that Africa is backwards, and Africa, people swing from trees, and people, all nonsense, absolute nonsense. Um, And so that creates a distance between African Americans, African in the diaspora, and continental Africans who were born in Africa. I went to Africa first, 1975. I went to Ghana.
1975. Is there any reason why you decided to go to
Well,
Ghana
Ghana was the most
1975?
popular country for African Americans to travel to that I knew of. A very good friend of mine had
Okay.
gone to the Gambia, and because
West
of
Africa.
Roots, the book Roots, and
Yes. Was
that's
designed by
correct.
Professor
That's
Alex
correct.
Haley.
But people I knew were going to Ghana, and so I decided I wanted to go to Ghana. And a friend of mine who is on my board at the Sister City Association had gone to Ghana the year before, and I was married at the time, and he didn't want to go to Africa. He didn't want to travel. He just wanted to stay home. And my friend said to me, I've never forgotten this. My friend said to me, "Do everything as though you are going, and you will go." So she said, "Get your passport." I'd never had a passport at that point. "Get your shots, your immunizations to travel. Start looking at airline tickets." Now, let me tell you, when you get your vaccinations, you're going someplace. You're not going to get those shots and then stay home. So I just decided I was going, and then my husband at the time uh, decided to go as well. So we went, and I had a great time. It was just an amazing time, and I never forgot Africa after that. I never forgot about Africa. So far I've been, I think, to Africa. This next trip to Tanzania and Zanzibar will be my 16th trip to Africa. And I've been to Kenya 6 times, and I've been to Senegal twice, and I've been to South Africa twice. Several countries I've been to multiple times in Africa.
Yeah. You revisited many parts of the African countries. You say
Yes,
Kenya
yes,
6 times,
yes, because
Senegal
we were
twice.
doing work in
Let me
Kenya.
let me
We did
ask
a
you.
lot of work in Kenya, so that's why I went so
Yeah,
many times.
yeah. That's one of the area what I would like to go further to ask you, because as a president of the sister city, I know only one that I know since we met you here in Washington is only one is Limbe. Do you have other sister cities that you connected in Africa? I know you are planning to travel to Tanzania, particularly Zanzibar,
Yeah.
where I was born, part of United Republic of Tanzania. Tell me a little bit about your journey through this doing project in African country, particularly in Kenya. Kenya, you've been involving in many aspects of library, if
That's
I'm
true.
not mistaken, and then
Yes.
also in
So,
Cameroon. And you've been to 36 country background. Your background is say 36 country around the world,
in
including
Africa,
16
yes,
in
yes.
Africa. Tell me a little bit about Africa. What motivates you? Because there is one issue here we need to look upon ourselves between people they call African Americans and the people from Africa. We have completely opposite mindset between ourselves. What you can tell me, how you can tell the audience, what's the reason behind we are opposite in between us? We are black people, all of us, but we are different in terms of the way we are coordinate each other. Number one. Number two, also, which one leading you? Which motivate you to say, I'm African Americans and I look Africa is my motherland. Let me starting a project to help Africa.
Yeah.
And also other issue of, as you said before, some other people in African American society, they say, no, I don't need anything to know about Africa. But if you go back, some of them, they've been called African Americans. What African American means, you are connected to the continent of Africa. We need to be all inclusive, and all together we make one as a black people moving forward.
So, this is one of my favorite topics, and uh, it's fairly complicated if you don't know the history. And so, I study the history of Africa. I study the history of African Americans, and I study the histories of Africans in the diaspora. So, it is not by accident that African descended people inhabit every continent. I used to say except Antarctica, but there's some of us up there too. So, uh, and many of us, if not most of us, are descendants of people who were stolen from Africa and taken to make European countries rich, taken to other places to make Europeans rich. So you look at the Queen of England and all of her diamonds and emeralds and gold and all of that came from Africa and India because the British were exploiting Africa. The French exploited Africa. The Portuguese exploited Africa. I can go down the list. And they took people to other lands to build plantations and pick cotton and harvest sugar cane and all of that. And so to not recognize that we are the same people. We came from Africa. We were taken, our ancestors were taken all over the world. To not recognize that is simply to say, I'm ignorant of my history. And so I'm not angry with people who are ignorant of their history. I just try to help them understand what their history is. So Africans in the diaspora, I was recently in Turks and Caicos in the Caribbean, and they're black people just walking around, but they are descendants of people from Africa. Uh, you can go to Puerto Rico, you see black people. Mexico. Now, some people got to Mexico
In Latin America, some part of Latin America, there are black
everywhere,
people also
everywhere,
being there.
everywhere.
Is everywhere.
And
Yeah.
in
So
Mexico, they have a history that predates enslavement. There were actually warriors and sailors who came from Mali to the southern parts of Mexico, settled there. They didn't come to conquer, they just were explorers. And they have carved these amazing statues that are inescapably African. I mean, they got broad noses, they got cornrows, They have a helmet that was like the ones that the warriors in Mali were wearing back in that time. So to deny that history is ridiculous. Now, the reason people deny the history is because they've been sold a bill of goods that says Africa's backwards. Africa is not a place that you want to be from. But it's just not true. If you studied the civilizations of Africa, of ancient Africa, the people who built the pyramids, the Arabs didn't build the pyramids, Black people built them. And they weren't enslaved people. They were people who, when the Nile flooded, they would go up and build on the pyramids with the Pharaoh, and then go back and farm when the Nile had subsided. So if you don't know that, you say ridiculous things like, "I don't have a connection to Africa." So I believe that we are African not because we were born in Africa, but because Africa was born in us.
Let me move on into other subject. It's very fascinating conversation with you, Madam Lou, based on what you understand about Africa. And it's also my pleasure to hear that somebody like you take effort and realize that Africa is part of yours. Regardless, you're born in the United States, but you understand Africa. Thus, you open this Limbe sister city you done in Kenya and many parts of Africa. Um, Before I move on to another question, because we are nearly ending our discussion, um, what we can do to educate some other African Americans who really believe that they don't understand to go to Africa.
Well,
As a consultant yourself, you've been providing training. Have you ever conducted, because you've been to Africa, you've been to Africa and you're still going to Africa, you're going to Zanzibar, Tanzania next year. Have you organizing any training since you've been doing number of projects in Africa that motivate some of the African American young people, elderly people, middle age, say, hey, Africa is yours. Look back what I'm doing in Africa and what you can do for the future.
so the answer is yes. So with our sister city association, Seattle Limbe Sister City Association. By the way, Seattle has two African sister cities. One is Mombasa, Kenya, and the other is Limbe, Cameroon. Uh,
Is that all of them you are associate with, or you are associate only with the
well, I have
Limbe
been
one in
associated with
Cameroon?
both. We used to meet together. Now we don't. So I'm primarily working with the Limbe, and we do. Um, Projects in Cameroon that we tell people about and we encourage them to join us. We have a menstrual care project so that girls can stay in school during their periods. We make those kits here. We make them in collaboration, at least before COVID. We made them in collaboration with a mosque, a synagogue, a Catholic church, and my church, which is First African Methodist Episcopal Church. So that's getting people in Seattle to talk to each other across lines that we think we can't talk across. Religion, it's like, well, I can't talk to that person because they're Muslim, and I can't talk to that person because they're Jewish, all of which is foolish. We can talk to anybody. So that's one thing that we do, the menstrual care kits. And we have people sitting together who laugh and talk, men, women, children, who make these kits to help girls stay in school when they have their periods. So that's one thing. We, as I already mentioned, we support the two nurses' salary in Bawa, and we pay the salaries of teachers in Cameroon. Cameroon is now in civil war, so we pay some teachers to teach the kids who came down from the war torn parts of. That's
Northern
right. And so
Cameroon,
when
I
they,
believe there is between French and English part. There are some sort of
yeah,
difference
big
between.
difference. And so they come down to um, the near, not necessarily in Limbe, but near Limbe, and so we help pay some of the teachers to teach the kids who had not been able to go to school for years. So that, and we talk about that so that people know that they can help us do that. We have installed a water system, a 20,000 liter water system at a regional hospital in Limbe. We are now working to install a 20,000 liter water system in a neighborhood in Limbe so that that people in that neighborhood don't have to walk a mile back and forth to get water. So, we say, you can help us do this. You don't have, and then we take people to Africa. So we organize these trips. We've been to Cameroon 3 times. We went to and I don't go alone. That's what I mean. We organize the trips and take people. Uh, we took a group to South Africa. We took a group to Benin and Togo. Fascinating countries, and got caught by COVID and had to figure out how we were going to get home because the airports closed. Uh, and then we're going to Tanzania and Zanzibar. Um, I've been to Zanzibar primarily. I just landed my plane in Tanzania, but spent time in Zanzibar after one of my Kenya trips. Um, and I'll show you how people divide us so that we think we're not the same people. When I was in Zanzibar, staying at one of the hotels on the beaches, we were like, well, we want to go into Stone Town and see what's going on there. And the woman at the hotel said, "Well, don't book a tour through the boys on the beach." That was my first clue because you don't call grown men boys. Don't book a tour with the boys on the beach because you just can't trust them. Book it through our hotel. Now you're a white woman in Zanzibar telling me don't talk to black people. That meant I'm.
Oh my God.
So of course we went right down to the beach and said, "Who can take us on a tour of Stone Town?" Had the best time. But that's how we get these messages about each other so that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And as long as Africans from the diaspora react to Africans from the continent in negative ways, the colonizers, the enslavers will have succeeded. And that's what I spend my time trying to fight against. So travel, you get to know people. We say we have not been to a country unless we've been in somebody's home. So we go and visit, we sit and talk, we break bread, we laugh, we sing, we dance. We have a good time.
Well, we have so many to discuss, but we spend more time in other area, which I trying to ask you to get your feedback and your insight about how you feel about Africa. But to conclude our discussion today, how have you experienced living in the US in the different cities and also across traveling to African continent? And then also, I believe you've been to other countries in Europe yourself and Latin America, and also now you're in
Yes.
Mexico, correct? Tell me, which country do you feel that lead you to make a decision, maybe one day to relocate in Africa to see? I know it could be an awkward question to you, but I feel uh, so happy to see somebody like you that you are paying attention to the continent of Africa.
So I have grandchildren and I can't get too far from them. So I probably will live in the US until I die and will come to Mexico because it's 5 hours from my grandchildren. So that's a selfish part of me. I can't be too far from them in case they need me. They may not, but I need to be available. I'll tell you, and I'll say this. I love Africa. I love every place I've been to Africa. I have never had a negative experience in all of my travels to Africa. Never, not one. And the place that I would like to go back again is Mali, because my experience with Mali is the Malians want to be Malians. They don't want to be French. They don't want to be they don't want to be British. They just want to be who they are. We went up to visit the Dogon people. They don't want to build a bunch of concrete roads, asphalt roads for people to come in, because they know that if people start coming to in large numbers, they'll try to change them and build condos. And that's what's happening in Mexico. You know, you got to drive forever to find a Mexican village without somebody trying to build a condo. So I can travel to any African country, and I hope I get to go to some more. I want to go back to Benin and Togo because COVID cut our visit short. We had a second group that was going to meet us there. They never got to come because of COVID. So I'm going to keep living in the U.S. That's the plan for right now. I'm going to keep coming to Mexico, and I'm going to keep going to Africa.
Sorry for
That's okay.
interruption a little bit. Yeah, Madam, final question to you today. I will invite you for other discussion, primarily to talk about America in particular. Today we cover a lot about Africa, your activity, your issue that you have done in Africa. You have two children. You have a grandchildren. How proud they feel about you being a mother of two children, being a grandmother of couple of children, grandchildren. How do they feel one day they will follow your steps to look you as a good model or model for you to go to Africa? Do you think your children will take the same
Well, I
steps in coming to say we had a mother here that she had spent most of her life to go to Africa, and generation by generation are completely different, but mostly people in heritage generation from one generation to the other generations.
yeah.
You are role model for your time and your generation until now. Tell me about how proud you feel being someone like
Well,
you
let me just
to see
say,
Africa as your
one
love.
of my daughters has already traveled to Africa. She lived in Togo for a summer, and she traveled to several countries surrounding Togo while she was there, and she loved it. So that makes my heart good, feel good. Um, Two of my grandchildren have already traveled with me to Africa. So one to Cameroon, well, both to Cameroon on two different trips, and they loved it. They had a great time. Um, my my daughter said, somebody said something about Africa when she was in my presence. And she said, "Oh, no, 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 please don't mention Africa. We'll be here all night if she if you start talking about Africa." So she was warning people away from me so that we wouldn't talk all night. So they get it. They understand who we are as African Americans. They understand about the diaspora. We talk about the history. And I talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. So I talk about colonization. I talk about enslavement. I talk about how resilient diaspora and continental Africans are. So they get it. And they may get a little tired of me telling them, but uh, the scriptures tell us that if you have to tell the children the stories, we're commanded to tell the stories. And I take that seriously. So I tell my children, if your children got in my sight, I'd have to tell them. If some other children get in my presence, I have to tell them, because the bad parts of history, the negative parts of history will be repeated if we don't know that they happened.
Is there any, isn't, well, you mentioned very good, you touch me for, if we don't take action, history will
Yes.
repeat again. It's a very tough assignment
Well, it,
if
it,
people
it
don't
may be tough, but it's essential. If we don't tell people the stories, they don't know that it has happened, and they think they're doing something new. And if you don't tell the stories, we're doomed to repeat it. Doomed. And I know that in Africa, their view of the students are taught their own history. So they don't necessarily know that we are the same people. We go back to places we said, "Do you know who we are?" And they say, "Yes, you were enslaved." But they don't know that they know Michael Jackson and people like that in our earlier trips. We said, "Well, we're beyond Michael Jackson. We do some other things." But they don't know our history of invention and contributions to the world. So they think that we didn't do all the things that we've done. So, yeah, we tell them we do history lessons when we travel to Africa because we want them to know,
Do you normally, Madam, also teaching while
yes,
you are going to Africa? For example, upon your arrival, you've been to so many countries in Africa. Have you conducted any
absolutely.
lectures to educate between people in Africa? Because in Africa uh, we have 54 countries in Africa. We speak multiple language, despite is a foreign languages, which is colonizers'
That's
language,
absolutely correct.
correct? Which we inherited from colonizers. To me, you are the person, you've been dedicated your time. I think I'm glad you said that you're
History,
providing some
yes.
training in history, and history will tell the young generation of tomorrow. This is the history we have been through, and this is the history you can passing over to the next
Yeah, and and
generations.
I think an example of that is the war in Cameroon. So you have the francophone areas fighting the anglophone areas. Now it's more than language. I get that. It's resources and access to power and all of that. I get that. But you're talking about anglophone, which is English, and francophone, which is French, neither of which is an indigenous language to Africa. So you got people fighting each other based on whether they're anglophone or francophone. That's what I mean by
Well,
we've been
I think we
We've
are
been sold a
concluding.
bill of goods and we keep being sold that. And the history books in the African countries come from Europe. And they're not going to tell the nasty stuff they've done all these years. I don't know how any Anglophone African country honors the Queen of England, the King of England now, all those people. I don't get it, but that's just me. I mean, if people had colonized me, I wouldn't want to be honoring them, but they've been taught to honor, even though they colonized and enslaved your people.
Well, Madam, we have so many to cover. We have so many to discuss. We've been spending about an hour here. It is also my profound pleasure to welcome and join with me here at the Kidodi podcast. I hope our audience learn a lot through you, and our audience will have some comment through our discussion today. But today is my day to you. It's not ending today. It's going to be
Thank
another
you.
invitation to come to discuss other area where our society needs to understand, including including the role of the diaspora. We are part of the diaspora, and the diaspora needs to be together, regardless of different ethnic background. World we are living today is not the world we are living in 1960s, 1950s. We are far more ahead in terms of racial integration, but still we are a long journey to
Yes.
work together. It is my pleasure again to say thank you for coming to my studio today, and do not hesitate to tell the other that Kidori Podcast is here to discuss issue related in our hands. Thank you very much for joining with me, and I wish you all success. Don't forget, you are traveling to Zanzibar and
We are.
Tanzania next year. And I didn't ask you, maybe I can ask you to close our discussion. What the main objective that you are going to Tanzania? Maybe my fellow audience here would love to hear. Is there any reason you choose Tanzania, particularly Zanzibar, as an area for establish what we call is the sister city of
Well,
Seattle
we cannot.
and Zanzibar?
Seattle has a moratorium on the number of sister cities, so we until the city council gives us more money, we can't establish any more sister cities. However, we cannot travel to Cameroon, so we are choosing other places to travel. We are taking the menstrual care kits to the girls there. We have already connected with the Durham, North Carolina, Arusha sister city, and so we'll be visiting with them. We'll be visiting with the mayor. We'll be visiting on some of the sites that the Arusha sister city has established there. Um, so this will be an official sister city visit to someone else's sister city, because we believe that we are connected because we are the diaspora. So we can travel any place and connect with people there. So we're really looking forward to it. We're African, not because we were born in Africa, but
Thank
because
you.
Africa was born in us. Yes, yes.
Absolutely, madam. Absolutely. This is very good example to you to understand
We are.
we are Africans. We need to look Africa is a great
Absolutely.
place to live.
Absolutely.
Without that, we won't be able to move Africa as a
Yes.
great place
Yes.
to live. Our coordination is so essential to all of us, no matter what who you are, what you call African Americans. I'm calling African descent. Is a subject of decision making as a diaspora of the black people to realize their potential future. And the potential future is it is in your hands to passing to the next generation. Thus, I conclude today
Thank
in
you
my
so much
discussion
for
with you.
having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
madam. Really enjoyed. Thank you being with me here
Thank
in
you.
Kidodi podcast. Thank you so much and welcome again in the
Thank you.
next episode. Thank you. Stay safe out there in Mexico. We
Thank
wish you
you.
all the best.
Until next
Thank you
time.
very much. Until
Uh-huh.
next time. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.